I am joined by Les Thatcher. Les, how are you this evening?
I'm good, Dave, and happy to be with you. We've been playing around trying to get this hooked up for months, have we not?
Yeah, we have. I've been doing the show for 2 years, and when I first started, you were right there in the top 10 guys that I wanted to interview at some point. And here we are 2 years later, and I'm finally getting to do it. So
wow, I'm not really that hard to get to. It's just we just haven't been able to make the time. But here we are, as I hope the show has gone well for 2 years.
It has. It has very well, and I appreciate that. So, but we're going to talk about you though, Les. We're going to talk about you now, and I'm gonna start by I'm gonna stroke your ego a little bit because to me, Les Thatcher, you are one of the greatest workers I've ever seen in wrestling, and to me, you are so underappreciated for everything you've contributed to this business. So I am so glad that we get to talk to you, and hopefully turn a little eyes on you and in your career and what you've done and are still doing, what you're still doing with the business. So
well, thank you. I appreciate. I just celebrated my 58th year this past 4th of July. It was I had my first match in July the 4th, 1960. So I'm like now at about 58 and a half years into this crazy business.
Yeah. So let's talk about Les prior to wrestling.
Okay.
You were born in Cincinnati, is that correct?
Yeah, actually, yeah. Born and raised in the suburbs of Cincinnati, and actually got a birthday coming up here. Today is the 15th. In 13 days. Well, I will be 78 years old.
Oh, wait a minute, hold on. But this will come out. So by the time we release this, it'll just be about a week out from your birthday. So happy birthday, Les. So we'll make sure we plug that when we release it. So, so what was it like growing up in Cincinnati in the Midwest at that time? And what was your childhood like? And what sport? Did you play sports, or what were you doing with your time?
Yeah, I talk about I kind of lived the happy days, right? For American Graffiti, that sort of thing. I was, sports. I got into organized sports actually at age 7, playing Cub Scout baseball.
Oh yeah.
And played organized baseball, sandlot football. Played a couple years of high school basketball. Actually started racing on the drag strip before I had a driver's license at age 15. Wow. And I was, my parents were very supportive of everything, just wonderful people, and then started wrestling at the when I got involved in wrestling, it was the YMCA's here because this high schools had no wrestling. Right. There was no organized school wrestling in the city of Cincinnati when I was a kid. So, but became a fan about age 9, I guess it was. Watching, saw my first wrestling on a black and white 10-inch screen at a neighbor's house. We didn't even have a TV at the time. Okay. And so I was hooked from that point on. But, I was involved in sports and like I say, hot rods and drag racing. And like I say, if you watched Happy Days or the movie American Graffiti, that was pretty much my childhood, my teen years.
Yeah. So who were you watching on TV? Is this when Alhaft was running Ohio in the area, or?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. The first show we saw was Friday night. It was from Cincinnati's Music Hall, which is still up. I mean, it's a historical venue now, but it was. But Haft actually was on WLWT here in Cincinnati. He was on WLWD in Dayton and WLWC in Columbus.
Okay.
But we also here we got wrestling. Talk about an overload. We got wrestling out of Chicago, wrestling out of New York, the Kinescope tape from Hollywood Wrestling, Texas Wrestling, and plus we picked up Dayton's show and Cincinnati's show here. So the part of town we lived in. So and of course Haft was one of the biggest promoters in the country. He ran, besides Ohio, Michigan, West Virginia, Kentucky, and Indiana. Yeah. And they had probably 70 to 75 guys on a roster. They were running 2 to 3 towns a night during that period. And virtually every top star that I saw on any of the TV shows at some point in time came through this area.
Yeah. So who were you a fan of? Who were your favorites when you were a kid and you were watching?
Buddy Rogers was my childhood idol.
Oh, yeah. So did you ever get to meet Buddy when you
I
guys?
never did.
No?
Never. I always, I look back and I think in my in-ring career, I would have loved to have worked with him once, once, but we never actually were in the same territories ever.
Yeah. So at what point when you're watching and everything else, did that click in your mind that, you know what, I think I'd like to do this. This is something that I think I'd like to commit my life to.
Well, I was always fascinated by it, but I think what really is when, in my early teens, I guess, like I say, my mother had this big, long pillow, which at the time was when I was 9 years old, as tall as I was, but I'd get down on the floor in front of our TV and practice, and go through the whole rigmarole of watching how the guys put a headlock on and that sort of thing, and played at it. But then at age 12, I started wrestling in the YMCA's. But as far as becoming a pro, I guess it was probably in 1954 or somewhere in there is the thought of actually being a professional wrestler, started to play in the back of my head. Yeah. And so, of course, back then, it was closed shop. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't just, there was no wrestling. It wasn't a wrestling school on every street corner. And, so at age, by the time I was late 17 or just probably about the age of 18, I started trying, I'd talk to some of the referees and then I got in the car and I drove up to Reynoldsburg, Ohio, which is where Alhaft's office was, mm-hmm. and talked to I didn't know what a booker was at the time, but it was Frankie Taliber. Yeah. And he was really, and at the time I was about 175 pounds. And he said, well, kid, you need some more experience, put on some size and this and that. So I had pretty much run into a dead end, where do I go from here? Yeah. And so anyway, Wrestling Review magazine was the big monthly wrestling magazine that was on all the newsstands. And, of course, I had a copy, every time it came out. Mm-hmm. And I saw the very first ever pro wrestling school was Tony Santos in Boston. Uh-huh. And there was they had done an article in Wrestling Review on Tony Santos's school, and it showed a picture of the school and how he was helping aspiring young athletes who had an interest in becoming professional wrestlers. So I thought, wow, well, maybe this is my end. So I wrote him a letter, and he sent me back a trifold. I wish I'd saved that, and of course I didn't. But
right,
a trifold, showing a picture of the ring and say, become a TV star, travel the world, and the whole pitch. Yeah. And it was for the absorbent price of $300 for 6 months. So anyway, made contact. And in February of 1960, I was 19 years old, got on a bus, Greyhound bus here, and went to Boston. And that's where it started. Yeah.
So you mentioned your debut. Tell us about that. When you said it was on July 4th. What year was that again?
1960.
1960. So who was that against?
Started training in February of 60 and had my first match in July the 4th, 1960. It was, actually I wrestled twice that day. Okay. It was at a fairgrounds in Blue Hills, Maine, and there were 4 of us on the card. Now, when I work with young guys today and they talk, they come in the door smart, obviously, to the business. And, I said, I started my training in February, and my first match July the 4th. I said, when they smarten me up, and they'll say, when? I said, July the 4th, that morning.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you over that 6, you kind of got an idea, maybe, but you obviously didn't want to open your mouth. And, of course, it was breaking in. It was a whole other ball game. I went up there, like I say, 19 years old and full of myself, and I was an athlete, man, and I was, and quite frankly, Dave, they handed me my ass for the first few weeks, right?
Yeah.
Because they weren't going to smarten you up until they were sure you were going to stick. But they had fun with us. Some of the veterans that would come in, some of the guys on the roster, and work with you. I mean, nobody actually beat you up, but they let you know they were there and that they were, But then the way they actually taught us to work without smartening us up would say, well, now you two guys, we want you to practice holds, how to apply them, how to get in them, how to put them on, and so forth. But you guys aren't getting paid, and you guys aren't. There don't matter. There's not going to be a winner or a loser. So it just don't apply pressure. Put the holes on, but don't apply pressure.
Right.
So that's how we actually learned to work. So the morning of July the 4th, I was living in a $10 a week rooming house right across the street on Westland Avenue. Tony's gym originally was in a warehouse in the middle of a parking lot at the corner of Mass Avenue and Westland Avenue in Boston, and that was in the Back Bay area. And so anyway, I was living in the rooming house across the street. And the morning of the 4th, one of his kids came over and said, "Dad wants to see you." So, of course, my first thought was, "Oh, I've done something wrong, right?" He's going to rip on me here. So anyway, I go over, and he said, "You have your gear," which I had Alma Mills, Tiny Mills' niece, worked in the office there, and she made jackets and that sort of thing. So I had a jacket, I had my boots, and in anticipation of starting. And so he said, "You've got all your," I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, today's your day. Go back and pack your bag and come back and we'll sit down and talk." So I went and got my gear, came back, and he said, "Now, the way you guys practice holes, how you didn't apply pressure and so forth." So I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, that's what you're going to do today. We don't want anybody to get hurt. We want to, break you in slow." So anyway, the other three guys on this card, there were just four of us, and there were three matches in Blue Hills, Maine that day. It was Joe Sasso, who had played football at Boston College, and Bull Montana, who I'd bought tickets to see as a younger kid,
right,
and Cowboy Ronnie Hill. And so between Boston and Blue Hills, Maine, is where they actually, that my education came in that car. We all four rode together. And the matches, it was a 4th of July celebration at the Blue Hills Fairgrounds, and the ring was set up in the middle of the racetrack in front of the grandstand like, they do so many places. And so anyway, on the trip up, that's, they kind of smarted me up and eased me into it. So Ronnie and I opened the show. Bull and Joe worked the second match, and then Joe and I came back against Ronnie and Bull in the main event, and that was where it started.
So, okay, so who were you or where all were you working for in the early days there? Was it you working, was Tony running the shows there like that, or was he just booking you?
Yeah, Tony ran. Actually, there was no competition. At the time in Boston, there was no wrestling television at all.
Okay.
And the only people that ran the Garden, Tony actually ran the Garden once in a great while, but Eddie Quinn, the promoter out of Montreal, would come in and run the Garden occasionally.
Okay.
And other than that, there was no, Tony basically ran New England. He ran a lot of the towns, a lot of the beach towns during, the summer season. But he had regular towns too, like Brockton, Mass, Revere Beach, so forth and so on. And then in the summer, he'd run the fairs. So we worked the athletic tents in the fairs during the summer. And where, you just take on all comers and, but I mean, they had, we had a couple midgets, a couple girls. And so if there was nobody challenging they put matches together and sometimes you'd wrestle 4, 5, 6 times a day, in those tents, at the fairs. But, so that was the first 2 years, I worked with, I stayed with Tony. I came home at Christmas in 1960, stayed home for a month or so, went back up and stayed until November of 61. And then I headed back down to Ohio. And the first promotion I worked with in early 62 was Jim Barnett's office out of Indianapolis.
Right. Okay. So what was it like working for Barnett? You hear all these stories about Jim Barnett. What was it like working for him?
Jim, that's where the name Thatcher came from.
Okay.
Jim, my real last name is Malady, and it's Irish, Malady.
Okay.
And, of course, in the Boston area, the Irish heritage is strong. So the name has always been mispronounced. I mean, you see people as Malady. I mean, there's all sorts of pronunciations, but the real way it's said is Malady. So anyway, when I first went to work for Barnett, they used my real last name. And Jim, being a perfectionist, as he was, got tired of hearing the ring announcers or the TV commentators mispronounce my name. And so I'd been with them, I guess, 5 or 6 weeks, and Les Ruffin came into the dressing room in Indianapolis TV on a Saturday morning and said, the old man's tired of hearing people butcher your last name. He wants to change it to Thatcher. And, of course, I was barely 21 years old, so I didn't care what they called me. I just wanted to wrestle. So I've been Les Thatcher ever since.
Wow.
But that first appearance for Barnett was in Indianapolis TV. You talk about a baby face. I was 21. I turned, my birthday is in October, and I turned 21 in October 61. And so when they finally called me, I'd sent pictures and some background to the Indianapolis office. And when Les Ruffin called me, he said, do you have proof that you're 21? And I said, yeah, I do. So anyway, you watch TV, but I had never been on a television show. So anyway, I walk into the dressing room at the TV station in Indianapolis that first Saturday morning, and there is Fritz von Erich, Dick the Bruiser, the original Sheik, Art Nelson, Stan Hollick, Joe Blanchard. I'm trying to think if I'm missing anybody here. And, these are all people I bought tickets to watch, right?
Yeah, right.
And I'm thinking, man, I was sort of nervous. I worked twice. We did one live show, and then they did a taping. And so that first Saturday, I got to work with, forgot to mention, Angelo Poffo, Randy Savage's dad.
Right. Yep.
And I worked with the Sheik on the tape, and Angelo in the live show, and that's how it started with the first big promotion I was with.
Yeah. So how did you take the Sheik when you first met him? Did he break character at all with you, knowing he was going to work you, or did it?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
In a dressing room, but that's the thing with Eddie. He lived his gimmick. I mean,
right.
If back then, if you had one, Joyce, his wife, she was his slave girl. That went to the ring with him and carried the prayer rug and that whole thing. Yeah. But like when they pulled in the gas station, she's the one who said, fill it up. Right. They went into a restaurant. She ordered his food, right? So, I mean, he lived the gimmick that, he was a college graduate here, in Michigan. But the gimmick was that he was an Arabian Sheik and he couldn't speak English. Yeah. So that was the way they played it.
Yeah. So were you still working in the area as like Bruiser and Snyder started taking over Indianapolis and the Sheiks started taking over Detroit? So how much in the mix were you of that and all that was going on, and what was your perspective of all that takeover and the change in the guard then?
Well, again, as a young guy, just being able, I was living my dream, Dave. And so the actual politics of the whole thing. Did I care? No, not really. Right. I was just having a ball. But being a local guy, and today it's all about jobbers. But back then, you learned this business by looking at the lights, and they were called carpenters because you helped build the stars. Yep. Right. Mm-hmm. So anyway, actually, I along with a couple other local guys who later on we went on the road together. We worked for Sheik and for Bruiser.
Right.
Because actually it was never a time when they ran in the same town at the same time, or, Wilbur and Dick pretty much, Sheik ran Michigan and upper part of Ohio, and they ran central Indiana and up into Chicago and so forth. So at that point in time, there was really no overlap. So we could work for both offices. My God, I couldn't even begin to tell you how many times in the ring with the Sheik or with Bruiser or any of those guys. But, back then, that's how you earned a reputation to be used a higher spot on the card, was to be able to go in and get the job done as they needed it done, right? To get them over, and so it was, back then too, that was every time you changed territory, it was like going to a new school, a new college. Yeah. Because you're working with guys who were stars in the business, who had worked at a top level, and it was just basically, you shut your mouth, opened your ears, and went along for the ride because, back then it was all improv.
Yeah.
I mean, there was no such thing as going out to the ring and walking through a finish or a match or laying out a match, and I wouldn't even know how to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, if you held a gun to my head and said, Les, I want you to plan out a 10-minute match step for step, I'd just say, shoot me, Dave, because I couldn't do that, you know. So it was, and that was part of, these guys, I hear all the stories, and I know that it happened occasionally where some young guy would, get an attitude and think he was better than he really was, or think he had belonged someplace that he probably didn't at that time. And there were times that guys got their asses handed to them. But to me, I never ran. I mean, there might have been times where maybe some veteran didn't give me as much as I should have got, but it was never a point where I had to fight my way out of the ring, right? Or I thought that my health was in jeopardy. And it was just a great learning. And like I say, for a kid who had been a fan since I was 9 years old, to work with all these guys that I'd bought tickets to see and to see on television, man, it was just, I was having a ball.
Yeah. So working in the Midwest in that time, did you encounter Wild Bull Curry when he was in the area?
Never worked with Bull. Actually, I met him. He worked for Santos some up in New England.
Oh,
when he was home in the area.
Yeah.
And several stars are up there. I never had the opportunity to work with him. When I went back after I come home for Christmas in 1960, when I went back, I took my car and I had a decent car. So when like Pat O'Connor would come to town, or Argentina Rocca, or Pampero Firpo, he would have me drive him around to the town. So I had the opportunity to talk to these guys in the car, and and they were all, they were good guys to learn from and to get an education from, So it was a great time for me, in terms of learning. Funny with Rocca, he had these big nasty cigars, right?
Yeah.
And it wasn't the dead of winter in Boston, but it was the weather was it was a pretty good chill on. And Tony would fire up one of them cigars in the car, and I'd crack my window because it was suffocating. He'd say, "Kid, can you roll up the window?" And I thought, yes, I'll die of smoke inhalation rather than make Argentina Rocca mad, right?
Yeah, really.
So it was, it was a great time, and it was. I mean, the thing I don't know that there would have been a better time to break into business, because I got to work with some of the best,
right.
And if I wasn't working with them, I was sitting in the locker room listening to them talk, or riding in the car with them, and it was just an amazing education.
Yeah. So when did you kind of move down south then, and kind of get involved in some of the NWA territories down there, and really start sinking your teeth in down there?
Well, I first time I went south was in '63.
Okay.
I went into the Carolinas for the first time in the spring of '63 for Jim Crockett Sr. Actually, to get in there, I had to have references, and Sandy Scott, another Ohio boy, Jim Grabmeyer, and Johnny Heidemann, three wrestlers that I'd worked with in the territory here. When I say the Indianapolis office, Barnett ran Ohio, Kentucky, Michigan, West Virginia, so we worked all over the area. Yeah. So they gave me references, and that was the first time it actually, other than working the main territory here and Boston, or New England actually, that was the first time I'd been to the South. And it was that was an education in more than one ways too, because I grew up in a colorblind environment, right? I mean, my Sandlot baseball coach was a black gentleman who taught me a lot about being competitive and so forth and so on. And the team was like half and half. I went to school, with blacks, and I mean, so in 1963 to go south and see there's a water fountain for the white people and a water fountain for the black people.
Yeah.
My mother just knew that with my liberal upbringing that I'd probably get lynched by the Ku Klux Klan in the South. But anyway, that was my first venture down there, and I stayed down there with Crockett for about 6 months.
Okay.
And back then too, as you're learning the business, your shelf life in one territory isn't all that long.
Right.
Although that was a big territory. And also, well, actually, let me back up a little bit. In '62, out of the Indianapolis territory, I went to Calgary for the summer in the summer of '62 for 3 months.
Okay.
Actually, almost 4 months for Stu.
Uh-huh.
And so that was a good education, working the loop up there. And no, I didn't go to the dungeon. Everybody said you went to the no. I was invited, but I was as dumb as I was as a young man. I was smart enough not to go to the dungeon.
Yeah, right. Well, you actually won the NWA Rookie of the Year in '66, and I mean,
yes.
You beat out some stiff competition. I mean, was that not Terry Funk's rookie year as well? I mean,
yes.
Yeah.
I just talked to Terry the other day. We were talking about the first time we met was actually in '67 when Eddie Graham I was wrestling at work in the Mobile territory, and Eddie had contacted Rocky McGuire, the booker there, and said, he's going to be the NWA Rookie of the Year. We want him here in this territory. So anyway, that's where that's the first time that Terry, he'd been away from home and wrestled other places, but the first time he actually had uprooted and gone and settled in another territory was he came into Tampa in '67. So we've been friends ever since. But yeah, there was myself, Terry, and Bobby Shane.
Right. Okay.
Were the guys that were. So yeah, I always make joke. I said Shane and Terry made the money. I got the trophy.
Yeah, that's right. So and these times, those years, you were linked a lot to Roger Kirby and Dennis Hall, right? You guys did a cousin thing, right?
Well, yeah, I mentioned a couple other guys that we worked for, both Bruiser and Sheik, when they were running opposition to one another. It was Roger and Dennis. They're both natives of Indiana, right?
Yeah.
And so we were all, well, actually, I guess Dennis, I don't know if I started before both of them or not. Dennis probably started around the same time as I did. Roger a little later. But anyway, we got to be friends, and we'd hook up and when we could and ride to the towns together and make trips together. So, yeah, that was in '66. That was actually when I went south and basically never left again. But
yeah.
I'd been to Kansas City territory, and then in '66 went out to Phoenix and was out there for several months. And when I came back home, I was working some spots for Bruiser and Wilbur, but was looking for something to do. And Roger and Dennis had been in Atlanta, and so writing, for kids listening, say you wrote letters. Yes, we didn't have cell phones or, or internet. We either talked on and a long distance call. You were charged by the minute. So anyway, and communicating back and forth, and they sent me a letter and said, well, would you like to come in down here? We were having a good time. And Leo Garibaldi, who I had watched on television when Leo was a tag team with his dad, Gino, out of L.A., and so would you like to come in? And I said, yeah, if something's available. So one day my phone rings, and it's Kirby, and he said, Dennis and I are in the office with Leo. Leo wants to talk to you. So Leo got on the phone. He said, they say you could actually work, can you? And I said, well, I hope so. So anyway, they gave me a start date. So Dennis was getting ready to, went down to Florida for a while. So Kirby and I were sharing the apartment. And Dennis and Roger actually were cousins by marriage.
Okay.
They, not blood cousins, but cousins by marriage. So we just decided to try the trio thing, the wrestling cousins. So Kirby and I worked as a team in Atlanta while we were there, and then we went into Louisiana for Lee Fields, and that's where the whole thing started. Then Mobile, then Tampa, then Charlotte, and on and on and on. But yeah, Leo Garibaldi was one of my mentors too. What an amazing, brilliant booker. I mean, just brilliant. And so as well as, in '73, '74, when I went in to work the office in Atlanta during the war, and shared the desk with Gordon at TV. Leo was the booker then too, so we were in the office together every day, and I learned so much from him. But that's the thing. When I see the kids today struggling to learn how to tell a story in the ring or this or that, I was just blessed. I mean, I was
Yeah.
to work with so many brilliant minds and great workers in the ring as well.
Be sure to follow the Dynasty Wrestling Podcast Network and all of the participating podcasts on social media. The easiest way to find us is on Twitter. You can follow the network at WrestlePods, and you can find all the individual shows at their Twitter accounts. You can find the Wrestling Nostalgia Show at Wrestle Nostalgia, the Ring a Ding Dong Dandy podcast at Stampede Pod, and the Wild Men podcast at Wild Men Podcast. Also search us on Facebook for pages and groups. Participate, interact, join the network, and be a fan. Thank you for your support. Well, going back to Roger Kirby, I always said Roger Kirby, again, to me, is one of the most underappreciated talents in wrestling. I remember, later when he came back to Indianapolis and was teaming with Paul Christie, and he was always so good, and I don't think his name gets remembered as much as it should for what he did. Yeah.
I make a joke. I said I was always a contender for the junior heavyweight title. I never won the belt, yeah. But before Kirby got before Nelson Royal got the title, he and I were partners, and before Kirby got the title, he and I had been partners. Yeah. I said I trained the future junior heavyweight champions.
That's right. Yeah.
But yeah, well, I think the greatest compliment I've ever heard given to Kirb was Harley on a documentary about Kansas City wrestling said the difference between myself and Roger Kirby is I got a break.
Right. Yeah.
So I mean that's high praise.
Sure.
It really is. Yeah, Kirb is a hell of a worker. I mean, with us, we were always baby faces, right? But I mean, so many people know Roger as a heel.
Yeah.
But he was an amazing talent. We just had a great time, the three of us together.
Yeah. And later you went up and worked in the Maritimes, correct? And
yes, that's where I got involved in television.
That's
initially.
right.
That was in 1970.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to bring it up. How did that come about with you getting into the TV and the announcing and the broadcasting side more? How did that come up there?
Well, the crazy thing is we're going to get into my whole several of the things. Well, as a trainer, involved in magazines, those all just sort of popped up. It wasn't like I prepared for it or pointed my career toward that. But Rudy Kay, that ran the Maritimes, that opened the territory up there, which ran from April to mid-October. Rudy was my next door neighbor in Charlotte. Dennis and I had a townhouse in Charlotte, and Rudy lived next door to us. And we traveled together a lot. And, of course, you're filling time on the road, and you talk about a little this and that and the other thing. And I had always had a thought of being a disc jockey, like Wolfman Jack or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And so you realize, too, when I, the television commentators, when I was a kid, were usually a local kiddie show or a news guy or something, right? So many times they weren't concerned with actually getting into wrestling. They were getting $25 or something, to do the show. And so it was more to push themselves locally as well. So anyway, when I went to Tampa for the first time for the NWA Rookie of the Year thing, I met Gordon. And first time I ever saw Gordon doing television, I thought, oh, my God. So anyway, Rudy and I, I went to Charlotte from there, and so this is when Rudy and I were on the road together. And I said, maybe when I hang it up, I'd like to try doing play-by-play. I said, I'm really Gordon and I got to be buddies not just because of wrestling, but because of race cars too. Okay. He owned part of the Golden Gate Speedway in St. Petersburg, and me with my drag racing background and he and I, just bonded with that as well as the wrestling. So, anyway, I'm up there wrestling, and the Cormiers, Rudy and his brother, the Beast, and Leo Burke, and they were noted for their ribs, right? So we lived in Moncton. We wrestled in Moncton on Monday night. We went to Halifax on Tuesday, stayed over, did TV in Halifax on Wednesday morning, and went to St. John from there. So anyway, this was, I guess, maybe a little less than 2 months into my run up there. Actually, it was the only place I'd ever worked heel. In 20 years in the ring, I worked heel there for a couple months.
Yeah.
Because 1970, if you were an American citizen in Canada and you weren't in the Army, they had figured you were a draft dodger anyway, right?
Right. Yeah. Right.
Which I wasn't, but anyway, that's that. So Rudy had this idea to bring me in as a heel and was going to turn me babyface. He was going to team me with Freddie Sweet Tan, and then finally we would turn me babyface. So anyway, we're getting ready to on Monday before Moncton. He calls me and it just started shooting the breeze. And finally he says, when we were running the roads in the Carolinas, you talked about, you'd like to, try wrestling broadcasting and stuff. And I said, yeah. He said, well, I want tomorrow, or he said, when we get ready to go to Halifax tomorrow, bring a suit and a tie or sport coat, dress clothes. And I said, why? He said, because you're going to be the announcer on my TV. Huh. And of course, at first I'm thinking, okay, he's pulling my leg, right? This is I'm going to take all these clothes and I'm going to dress up on Wednesday morning, and everybody's going to laugh at me when I come into the studio, right?
Yeah.
And finally, he said, my announcer is from Toronto originally. He had a death in the family in Toronto, and he's got to go back there. And I guess it was some really close relative because he had to stay to help set up their, get their affairs in order and so forth.
Right.
So he said, I need somebody, and you're going to do it. And I said, really? And he said, yes. So that Wednesday morning in Halifax, cold. Now, I'd been interviewed, I'd been interviewed by other people. But I didn't know how to cue in and out of a segment. I had no idea. I'd never seen a run sheet. And realized, too, back then, Dave, that it was just a single guy on the desk. There weren't broadcast teams.
Right, yeah.
So anyway, cold and inexperienced, I sat down and did my first ever television show as the play-by-play and the color guy and everything else. And so some way or another, I got through it. And so, it did a couple weeks, and Rudy finally called me. He said, look, you're doing a good job for us. And he said, I'm just going to leave the guy who was doing the announcing in Toronto. I want you to finish out the season, and I'll pay you extra, over and above what you're making as a wrestler, and you finish out the season for me. I said, okay, fine. So that's how it started.
Huh. That's remarkable. So, and you talked about all these different things you've done. I mean, what about, what is it, 1972, where you essentially create the first wrestling T-shirt for the Briscoes? And how did that come about?
Well, three of us sitting around probably having a couple beers, and well, I was Leo Garibaldi was one of my mentors, and in doing so, you get the creative bug. So, I had said to a couple promoters that I thought, there's baseball T-shirts and this kind of T-shirt and that kind of T-shirt. And back in there in through the 60s, like the rock concerts and stuff, that's when T-shirts first started popping up, right?
Yeah, right.
And so I had mentioned T-shirts to Mr. Crockett.
Yeah.
But he wasn't, it wasn't like he just said, nah, that's nonsense. It's just he wasn't interested.
Yeah.
So Jack and Jerry and I were sitting around, like I say, probably drank a couple beers. And we're just talking about the business in general. And I brought up the idea, and I said, I think, like with you guys, because you're both over as baby faces and one thing and another. And they said, Jack said, well, let's do it. I said, really? He said, yeah. Well, I'll chip in, and we'll put together a shirt. So we did. That was, and Jerry Lawler was just getting, a good start in the business. Mm-hmm. So for the absorbent fund fee of $25, he did the pen and ink drawing for the first T-shirt. Yeah. I wish I had that original artwork now.
Really?
I'm not sure what it'd be worth, but I'm sure more than $25.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, but I was just going to say, to get a plug-in for you there, that you got kind of a recreation of that design on your Pro Wrestling Tee store, right?
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah. It's actually, it is the original artwork.
Okay.
Reproduced at Pro Wrestling Tees, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you can be a part of history.
That's right. Yeah.
And but that was 1972. That was the very first ever Pro Wrestling T-shirt. And Jerry and I, Jack, of course, was just in and out of the Charlotte territory at the time. Of course, they were prepping him, to be world champion, and in '73. So, and he was living in Florida at the time. Jerry and I would take him to the buildings and sell them, and then we start advertising them in the programs and one thing and another. We almost in the southeastern United States. I don't know if they still have a chain of rich department stores or not, but a wrestling fan had approached us and said, "Well, maybe we can get those for you in the rich department stores," which they talked to us, but it just never materialized. But the point was, we weren't merchandising guys or marketers. So there wasn't a huge markup in these things, and some of the buildings, I remember the Scope in Norfolk wanted 40%, so we just never bothered to sell the shirts there. But then once the promotions saw us that those guys are actually selling those things, then they wanted a piece. And of course, each building got 10% or a base fee or whatever. So at some point it was just like, okay, enough's enough. We were selling them, I think, for $3.50 a piece.
Yeah,
that's what the t-shirts went for at the time, and so we just discontinued because, trying to do that, and like I say, the promoters want a piece, the building wants a piece, and we just didn't have that, that much profit margin built in.
Yeah. So when did you get started then, as another aspect, with like programs and the magazines, and how did you start doing that kind of work with some of the promotions?
Well, that started with Mr. Jim Crockett Sr. as well as doing TV in the United States. When I came back into the States out of the Maritimes, when I'd been in Nashville at the time, and I went up to work for Rudy out of Nashville. I came back into Nashville for a while, and then went to I wanted to get out of there, so I went down to Tampa, and the Crockett's. Mr. Jim Sr. was still alive at the time, and they were looking for a number 2 babyface team to come in to work in behind Becker and Weaver, who were the top babyface team at the time. And so they were calling around different territories, and Louis Tillett recommended Danny Miller and myself. So we went up to the Carolinas. This was my 3rd time in the Carolinas. I've been in there in '67 and part of '68. And so we went up there. So the whole magazine thing was, this was in '71, and I was looking at some magazines of Mr. Crockett's, actually photo albums, like it's just had a picture of the wrestler and a little bio sketch underneath, right, and like 2 pictures to a page, and more of like for autographs, selling to kids and or adults for that matter, and they would get the wrestler, pass around and get the wrestler to sign them at the shows. So anyway, I was looking at these of Mr. Crockett, and I said, "These look really, really nice." And he said, "Yeah." He said, "We don't do this anymore." I said, "Well, why?" And I don't remember, to be honest with you. It was whoever had handled that, or wasn't with him any longer, or had moved out of the state or whatever. So I said, "Well, it's a shame." He said, "Well, why don't you try it?" I said, "Excuse me." He said, "Why don't you try it?" I said, "Really?" He said, "Sure. We got a whole file cabinet full of pictures, and you got to write some bio sketches and design a cover." And he said, "And I'll, we'll, get them printed and everything, and I'll pay you for doing it, and then cut you in for a piece of what we sell." I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah." But then also, again, as I said to you earlier, a lot of the stuff I got involved in was just by accident, really.
By chance,
it wasn't a plan. and that's how the whole magazine thing started. But then the same way with TV, when I left the Maritimes, I didn't, now Rudy had asked me, he said, "I'd like you to come back and help me in the office, help produce the television, and administrative, but he didn't want me to wrestle." And I said, "Well, I was 10 years in at the time, right?" And I said, "Nah, I still got a few bumps." And I was having a good time wrestling too. And so I just passed on it, and so anyway, so we were in the office, and this was in Charlotte, was in the office, and Lord Littlebrook, who had been up in the Maritimes with a couple of the other midgets during the summer the year before, and So he and I were in Mr. Crockett's office, and Brooks said to Mr. Crockett, why isn't Les on your TV? And Jim looked at him and said, what do you mean? He's on my TV. No, Mr. Crockett, he said, I mean as an announcer.
Yeah.
You know, he did Rudy's TV up in the Maritimes and did an amazing job. We were up there, and you know, we worked with him and so forth. And Mr. Crockett looked at me. He said, well, I didn't know that. I said, well, it just never came up. I never thought that you know, that you cared. So that's, and so then we started working me in. You know, I was, besides wrestling, was, you know, starting. Actually, how that whole started was I was sitting in with, like Bill Ward was Big Bill Ward was a local celebrity on Channel 3 in Charlotte, but he also did had been doing the TV there, wrestling for a number of years. But Bill, you know, in the middle of a hot angle, he might be wishing Miss Mary Jones a happy 86th birthday, you know, who was a big fan. And so initially for Mr. Crockett, I sat in with Charlie Harville in High Point some, and up in Raleigh as well, and in Charlotte. It just depended where they needed me or wanted me. But the point was, I knew I knew what the angles were, and you know what was going to happen, and so my job was, even if Big Bill or whoever was trying to wish Hattie Jones happy birthday, I was to talk over him and say, look at that, you know, and get the hot angle over. So
right.
That's how the whole TV thing started, and the magazine thing as well. So that was the way she bounced.
Yeah. So where were you working then after the Carolinas? I mean, how much longer did you work in ring, and where all were you working there after that?
Well, I my God, the hats that I wore. Well, you know, I started doing the magazines with Jim there and was doing TV, and then Mr. Crockett passed away.
Right.
And so Jimmy Jr. Took over the reins, and so I was still doing the magazine and wrestling, doing the TV, and then the war in Atlanta started. You know, Ann Gunkel and Tom Ernesto, and they split, and all the, you know, so the whole thing, the Gunkel promotion versus the NWA. So Jack Briscoe was tied in with the NWA, so he called me and he said, I want you to come down here, work in the office, handle the programs, and do the color with Gordon. Plus, you know, you come. The idea was for me to go in at first as I was injured, which I wasn't, but that's why I was doing the TV only, right? And then they were going to work me in to wrestling. And Leo had an idea. Bobby Shane was one of the top heels in the territory at the time. He was going to work an angle off the TV and put Bobby in a program in the major towns. So anyway, Jack, you know, we want you to do this, and here's what, you know, you'll get a piece of the action off the programs, plus you get a salary for, you know, for the office and this and that and the other thing. So I thought, yeah, okay, that's good, and I could still do the Crockett program. At the time, we weren't doing the big fancy magazine. We were just doing like an 8-page. But I could do that anywhere, right? Because you know, as far as writing it and laying it out, and mail it in mass to the Charlotte office, and they could have it printed. So anyway, Jimmy didn't want me to go, Jimmy Crockett, and no, he said, I want to keep him here. So Jack's a little upset by that, and you know, I don't want to get in the middle of the politics of the thing. I'm happy either way.
Yeah.
You know, the opportunity to work with Gordon and, you know, and share the desk with him was intriguing to me, and working in the office there. So anyway, so then I get a call from Eddie Graham, who was you know, besides being the owner in Tampa, and he also had a piece of the action in Atlanta during the war. And so Eddie said, we're going to get you to Atlanta. And I said, well, I don't want to get in the middle of some political struggle here. He said, well, here's what you're going to do. He said, you're going to give your notice to Jimmy that you're coming to Tampa to wrestle for me. He said, on your way to Tampa, you're going to drop your furniture off in Atlanta. And so then you'll come down here and wrestle for a month or so, and then you'll go back to Atlanta and do what we wanted you to do there to begin with.
Oh, well.
And I'm thinking, oh my God, this is again, you know, I'm not political to begin with, so I'm not a manipulator in that respect. So I'm thinking, I don't want to burn the bridge here and everything. So anyway, finally, we never had to do that because Jack was able to convince Jimmy to let me come down there. So actually, the first TV that I did in Atlanta with Gordon was the Saturday after Harley put the strap on Jack.
Okay. Yeah.
And that was that. In fact, that's a match between Bill Watts and Tim Woods, Mr. Wrestling. It's floating around on the internet somewhere, probably YouTube or wherever. That's the first show that Gordon and I had ever done together.
Yeah.
So that's how I ended up down there in the midst of that whole thing. So.
Yeah. So what was it like working with Gordon? Once you actually got there and stuff?
It was good. I've been, as far as a commentator, I've been the play-by-play guy. I've been the color guy, but I'm blessed to have worked with Gordon Soley, Bob Caudle, Lance Russell, Ed Capral, Charlie Platt, and Jim Ross.
Yeah.
I don't know that if there's a Mount Rushmore and those guys aren't on it, I'm not sure.
That's right, yeah.
Who would be. And it was just, as I've said several times, and I'll probably say it several times before you and I are done, I'm just, I'm blessed to have worked with the best of the best, whether it's behind the desk doing commentary or in the ring.
Yeah.
And, I've had a great time doing it too. But yeah, so it was, and of course, Gordon, or JR will tell you that Gordon is the yardstick. We
Right.
both have said we learned a lot from Gordon.
Yeah.
And, it's any of those guys. And there was never, I've had people say, well, how did you guys work it in? I said, it was never, they're professionals and I try to be, and it was never a break-in period. We sat down and we did shows.
Yeah.
A funny example, I don't know if you've ever seen the Night of Legends from Smoky Mountain.
Yeah, I have. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well, that was the first time JR and I'd ever worked together.
Okay.
And, we had met. We weren't, we'd never worked at, like when WCW was in Cincinnati and I'd go over to the old garden and visit, I'd talk to him a few minutes or something, but we had never worked together till that show.
Yeah.
So anyway, at intermission, he and I went to the back to get a drink and use the bathroom, and Terry Funk said to me, he said, I'm watching the monitor back here. He said, that's the way wrestling matches should be called. You and Jim are doing a hell of a job. He said, how long have you worked together? And I looked at my watch. I said, about an hour and a half. He said, oh, bullshit. I said, no, Terry. This is the first time we'd ever been on a microphone together, So, but yeah, so it was, I've been blessed to work. Well, and I mentioned Charlie Platt, and probably most people have heard of everybody else. Maybe not Ed Capral. Ed was the lead announcer in Atlanta for many years, and then he came up and worked with us in Charlotte for a while. But Charlie Platt did Southeastern wrestling out of Dothan, Alabama. Mm-hmm. And when I went down there out of Knoxville for a while, Charlie and I worked together down there, and they'd talk about somebody probably being underappreciated. Charlie would probably be one of those guys. But so that whole crew that I just mentioned that I was blessed to have had the opportunity to work with.
Yeah. So when did you decide that as far as in-ring competition that it was the end, and how does that decision come to be made? I mean,
well, in 19 actually I had my through the whole television thing I was wrestling, and so in November of 1974, well, actually, but right before that, Ron Fuller, he and I became very good friends in Tampa in 1971. Okay. In fact, his youngest son is my godson. Okay. And we became very good friends. So he bought the Knoxville territory from John Kazana. Right. I had been one of the top baby faces in Knoxville with Whitey Caldwell. We've been when John finally got television in there in late 68, early 69, I don't remember exactly. We were the first two baby faces to get over it, and so we were the guys that carried the babyface side for a couple of years there. But anyway, Ron called me. He said, I bought Kazana out in Knoxville. and he said, I know nothing about television. I want you to come in and build me a TV show. You have carte blanche, within reason, obviously, to put together a TV show. So here was a chance, like with the magazines, like with the T-shirts, I had a chance to create something.
Uh-huh.
And so anyway, I worked it out with Jimmy in Charlotte. So I still lived in Charlotte from November of 74 through November of 77. My schedule went like this. I had an apartment in Charlotte. I go in the office I had a cubicle in the office in Charlotte. I go in on Monday, and George Scott and I sit down and go over all the promos for all the towns, and realized back then there wasn't one TV that you had to insert all these. We did interviews in Raleigh on Wednesday from noon till 5:30.
Right. Yeah.
And two 2-minute 20-second promos for each town, and plus some if the guys are going out to another territory. But anyway, we would sit. George and I'd sit down, and he would give me the what I needed, the information for the Richmond show or for the whatever show it was, right? And so the town, the date, the top couple matches, and I'd make up run sheets, lead sheets, the television. Spit it out, Les. Under the television camera, when we were doing the promos.
Yeah.
And then I would probably wrestle that particular night. And so it was, I'd make the sheets up, might wrestle Monday night and Tuesday. Then I'd go to Raleigh TV on Wednesday morning, and we'd do the promos. And then for a while, I was doing Ed Kapler and I were swapping back and forth on the B show. They dual taped. It was all the same show. Bob Cottle had a desk on one side of the ring. We had a desk on the other side, and they were taping it on two different reels at the same time.
Okay.
With two different soundtracks.
Yeah.
So anyway, and then Thursday maybe I was off. Depended. And then Friday morning I get on a plane, go to Knoxville. Ron and I would put the TV together, wrestle in Knoxville Friday night, do the TV Saturday morning, wrestle in whatever town, Newport, Morristown, Harlan, wherever, on Saturday night, get back on the plane Sunday, go back to Charlotte and do it all over again. So I did this from November of 74 through November of 77.
Man.
So I was passing myself in the air on Fridays and Sundays, right? There I go. Here I am.
Yeah. Right.
So at some point, and at this point, I'm in my late 30s,
Uh-huh.
and I've got 16, 17, 18 years in the ring, and it's just I decided in 1980 that. I'd pretty much accomplished what I was going to accomplish physically in the ring. And I realized as far as with magazines, television, and that sort of thing, that was more a future for me.
Yeah.
And so I just kind of wound it down in 1980, and that was the end of it.
Yeah.
But I got 20 good years in.
Yeah.
And so it was, it's. Hell, if I could today, Dave, when I work with these kids, I ask the good Lord, if I do these weekend camps, I ask the good Lord on Friday, could you just make me like 30 years old for the next 2 days, right?
Yeah, really.
Because I can show them better than I can tell them.
That's right.
It's just...
Support all of the podcasts here on the Dynasty Wrestling Podcast Network. The best way to do that is go to our Pro Wrestling Tees store. It is at ProWrestlingTees.com/TheDaveDynasty. There you will find all of the shirts that we offer: I Heart Old School Wrestling, Bruiser Buddy, the Podcast Mask shirt, and of course, the official shirts for the Ontario Wildman and the Ring a Ding Dong Dandy podcast. Visit ProWrestlingTees.com/TheDaveDynasty, order a shirt, and support the network. If you would also like to support, you can join our Patreon. It's at patreon.com/DaveDynasty. There you will get exclusive audio and video clips, early releases on podcasts, and much, much more. And if you would just like to make one-time contributions to support us, you go to paypal.me/TheDaveDynasty. Thank you for supporting us. Thank you for listening. Continue to support independent wrestling podcast. Yeah. So how long after that you kind of got out of in-ring? When was it you started doing the bodybuilding stuff?
Well, I started that when I moved home.
Okay.
I lived in Knoxville. Once I moved to Knoxville in '77, except for a run down on the Gulf Coast when Ron sold the territory to Barnett, and I stayed with Barnett for a while. Then I went down to the Gulf Coast, lived in Pensacola, and worked in the office there and did the TV with Charlie Platt and helped produce the television. And excuse me. And so when I got a phone call from Ric Flair and said Jimmy Crockett, Blackjack, and I bought the territory from Barnett, and we had been on Channel 10, which was a CBS affiliate at the time in Knoxville, and had great numbers there. And that's where I really got creative with a lot of stuff that's on TV today that's commonplace. We did for the first time on the Southeastern show. It was stuff that people told us wouldn't work, by the way, but it did.
Yeah.
And so anyway, Rick called me, and he said Lynn Lepper and Pete Finley, who were the programming director and the sales manager at Channel 10, will work with us and let us stay on Channel 10. But one of the things that they asked us to do for that was to bring you back to host and produce the show. Because when I first went there, we first went from Channel 26 in Knoxville, moved over to the CBS affiliate. I was kind of the go-between, that if, Les, can you change this on TV or maybe this or that? I mean, we never had any major problems with the station, and they were doing well. They when we first started on Channel 10 in 1975, beginning of the year in '75, they were selling spots for I think $25 or $30. When Ron sold the territory to Barnett, they were getting $250 for a spot.
Wow.
And they had a couple. Well, a lot of sales managers looked down their nose at wrestling and didn't deal with it and just didn't work at it. But Lynn Lepper saw the value, and during that run there, when Ron still owned it, University of Tennessee played Notre Dame at South Bend for the first time in umpty-ump number of years. I'm not sure what the deal was. But anyway, they were on the ABC affiliate, which was Channel 26. And they, 26 ran the show on TV, and they were in opposition to us on Channel 10. And in our hour, the best they could do was tie us in terms of rating. So if you understand the University of Tennessee and football in Knoxville, that's doing something. So anyway, that's so I went back and produced a show for Crockett and Rick and Blackjack, and so finally there was a war there too, but all the war there did was kill the territory, quite frankly. The city, Atlanta was big enough city that both offices profited for quite a while, and then Gunkel just couldn't, she was blocked out with getting the fresh talent because of the NWA affiliation with our side.
Right.
And so it just finally, they closed their doors. But in Knoxville, the city wasn't big enough to support two major, and they got TV, and this was with Angelo Pompo's group, and some of our guys had jumped office, which didn't do anything for them or for us, as a matter of fact, but it just it ended up killing that territory. So anyway, I had in the meantime, I'd been there for a number of years and had opened a little refurbishing business, and so I was going to stay for a while, and I was freelance, and I was doing I was going over to San Juan for Carlos Colon. Okay. At the time, Carlos was running Barbados and Trinidad, which are both English-speaking. and so I'd go over and we'd go down the other end of the aisle to a small TV station, and I would do openings and wraparounds with and call the matches over the tapes that were going into Barbados and Trinidad, and then I was just freelancing basically in terms of television, and then doing had this little refurbishing business. We had 4 apartment complexes and I had a crew of 3 other guys, and so that was it was going good, and so finally. I just decided my dad had passed away in '83, and so in '85 I decided it's time to go back to Cincinnati and be close to my mom and help her out. And so I came up here and started working. I'd helped design a couple gyms and build them and manage them, and I was working with bodybuilders. I decided, well, I needed something. I needed an adrenaline rush, something to challenge me, right?
Yeah.
So at age 46, I did my first bodybuilding show, and so I thought I'll do one just to see how it goes. And so, 13 shows later, and at age 54, I said, okay, it's enough.
Yeah.
and I quit. But I was still good. Well, during the time up here, I was working with Perilla Performance, and John worked with pro bodybuilders and so forth and so on. But, I was doing the Smoky Mountain show for Cornette, and I've been up in New England for Savoldi and doing his television and working with Kevin. Kevin Sullivan and I had worked together as producer and booker for Mulligan and Crockett and Flair, and we got a chance to work together again up there. And so anyway, that's how it was all going about. So I was just minding my own business here and doing Jimmy's TV. And so then the training thing came about actually by accident too.
Yeah. So tell us that. How did that all get started with Heartland and stuff there in Cincinnati?
Yeah. Well, I was doing the competitive bodybuilding and working with bodybuilders and doing Smoky Mountains TV. And was very happy and carefree. And Bob Harmon, who was the original Beautiful Bobby for WWWF,
right,
is a Cincinnati boy, and Bob and I were friends. And he broke in Boston too. Actually, I don't know if you knew this or not. Dusty broke in for Santos up there too.
Really? No, I didn't.
Yeah,
know.
Just 9 years after I did. But yeah, he broke in up there in '69, and I broke in '60. So Bob called me one day, and he said, there's a guy that's got a wrestling school here, and he's got an idiot, his words, not mine, he's got an idiot as a trainer who doesn't know enough, and he's going to end up losing his students if he doesn't get a competent trainer. And I said, okay, why are you telling me this? He said, because you're the guy that should be doing this. I said, you're out of your friggin' mind. Right? So I never, as I look back at it, some of the guys that I worked with, Terry Taylor, J.J. Dillon, Bill, Scott Casey, tell me that I was a mentor in essence to them too, but I never looked at it like that. But anyway, so I said, Bob, he said, do me a favor. He said, they got a show Saturday night and please come and go to the show with me, and let me introduce you to the boys, and let's talk about it. I said, okay, because Bob and I had been friends for years. We'd traveled together, and so I said, okay. Now, I'd never been to an independent show at that time, Dave.
Oh, okay.
And when I went to this one, I was horrified. I thought, oh, my God. This is what's happened. My business has come to this, right?
Yeah, right.
This is 1992. Now.
Yeah.
And so I...
well, to be frank, now the product on TV wasn't a whole lot better in '92.
Well, yeah.
But anyway.
Yeah. Well, anything was a lot better than what I saw this
particular
night.
Okay.
Take my word for it. And anyway, so we're sitting there with a guy who owns a school, Bob and I, and watching. And there's these two kids in the ring, and the one kid goes out and grabs a chair. And I could tell just by the way he was holding it, he didn't know what he was doing with it.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, he's just going to threaten with it. He's not going to really hit the kid. Oh, yes, he is. So he hit the kid and rung his bell, and the kid was kind of out on his feet. And the match, even at the end of the match with a disqualification, the kid that got hit with a chair was walking around in circles, and he had sent a couple other the kids out there to get him out of there. And so I said to Bob, the guy that owned the school, the promoter was sitting on the other side. Bob was between the two of us. And I leaned over to Bob and I said, this kid didn't have a clue what he was doing in that damn chair. How long has he been wrestling? How long has he been working? And Bob leaned over to the promoter and leaned back to me, and he said, he's been to 5 practices. I said, oh, my God. You don't even have a business being in a match, never mind, you know. So I said, okay, I'll try this, right? So that's how it started. And when I went in with these kids, they were only working once a week. They were sharing a building with a karate school, and so they could only get in there on Saturdays and Sundays. So they were only training one day, and I said, no, that's not good. We're going to at least train the 2. And so that's how it started. And the first day I was with these kids, I said, here's the good and the bad news. The bad news is you guys are all going to start from scratch because you don't really have a clue. And the good news is we're going to do it right. And so that's how I started with training. And then the guy who I was doing the training for was a charlatan too, which I didn't know at the time. And so I decided with a couple of these kids, they wanted to, you know, branch out. He started to get upset because he was the guru until I got there, and then they started to realize that he talked a lot of trash and didn't know much, you know, which God knows how many guys are out there today as trainers who are the same, you know, they're not trainers. They need to be trained. But anyway, so then we decided to, actually that was in 90 or 91 because, okay, so we started, HWA started in 1992.
Yeah. Okay.
And actually, of all the things I've done in the wrestling business, being a promoter is the least exciting to me. I mean, but I realized that these kids I'm training needed a place, you know, to try what they were learning.
Yeah.
So that's how the HW. Well, I shouldn't say that because I did in '82 and '83. We skipped those years. I was running the tours for Georgia, WCW, here in Ohio, Michigan, and West Virginia for Barnett and Ole.
Yeah. Okay.
I ran the tours up here.
Yeah.
So that was a whole different ball game. So anyway, HWA started in '92 and late '91, early '92, and the rest, I guess, Dave, is history.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think when a lot of people look back at your time in that era there, one of the things that immediately pops to mind is the Pillman Memorial shows that you did in the late '90s. I think you did 4 of them, right? No, I think started in '98. And,
98, 99, 2000, 2001 was the last one.
Yeah, and I know I've heard you tell stories of all the work and how much of a task it was, but it's pretty monumental what you pulled off and the guys that were, I mean, it was really kind of a cross selection of talent from everywhere that was coming in to work these shows.
Yes.
Yeah. So.
Well, it was the only play by 2001, the mystique of all the major promotions being under the same roof at the same time was gone because Vince owned everything by this time.
Right.
But when we first started doing this, it was just going to be. There was never any long-term plan.
Yeah.
When Brian had the ankle fused, he had come up to my place to. Well, if you read his the book.
I have.
The biography.
Yeah.
There's a whole chapter. On the Pillman shows in there.
Yep. Right.
And it's well done. It's very honest and truthful. But anyway, he was, you know, I mean, it was sad to watch because there was a young guy with a lot of talent, and he was just, you know, he tried different boots and he was trying different things, and I said to him one time, I said, you know, all you're doing is you're putting all your pressure on the good ankle, the good leg, and you're going to end up ruining it. Yeah. I said, you know, you've got to stop worrying about flying in the air and this and that and the other thing, and just learn to work ground. You know, wrestle on the mat. You're your days of the big crazy bumps are pretty much over. But anyway, so when he passed away, the thought was, let's do a memorial show, a little memorial show for Brian. So we got the junior high school gym where he went to school in Norwood, suburb of the city here. And so it started out with just, well, who's this? Benoit and Jericho decided they were friends of Brian, and they would come and do a match. And then so, okay, well, now, of course, Austin and him were partners, and of course, Jericho and Chris at the time were with WCW. So, of course, Austin wasn't going to wrestle, but him and Sonny were coming to represent WWF at the time. And so, in talking to Dave Meltzer about this, Dave said, well, now all you need is ECW to have all three major companies, which kind of sparked an idea to me. So Chris Candido, of course, was married to Sonny.
Yep.
And Chris and I had become real good friends with, besides the wrestling, the weight room and the bodybuilding in Smoky. So I called. I didn't know. I'd never met Paul Heyman at the time. Yeah. And so I called Chris and I said, hey, if we get you on this show here. And I said at the time, Al Snow was kind of working both sides of the street, as it were. He was in ECW, but he was also had been under contract to Vince. Yeah. And I said, Al lives right up the road here in Lima, and we could put you guys in a match. And so Chris got back to me and said Paul signed off on it. So I left a message on Meltzer's voicemail. I said I just hit the trifecta. So that was how the whole thing started. We didn't know what we would draw, quite frankly.
Right.
And the junior high school gym with the ring set up and floor seats, we put about 1,200 people in there, and we turned away 300 or 400.
Yeah. Wow.
And it was just an amazing thing, and it was so at the end of this whole thing, it's like, oh, wow. But then I thought, well, we could do this again, right?
Yeah.
Like a dummy. So and you talk. Yeah, it was. We started. We had a committee, and to handle catering, because we had now CW and ECW paid for the guys' plane tickets to come in. We took care of the hotel. We fed them. We saw that they had a gym to work out in if they wanted to work out. We we had volunteers to drive them wherever they needed to go and so forth. We picked them up at the airport and took them back to the airport and all the above. And of course, the three major promotions paid for their plane fare. And this was their day off, and these guys were working for nothing. And that first show in the junior high school gym, Terry Taylor was with WCW at the time, and he was sitting up in the grandstands with me watching Benoit and Jericho. Yeah. And he said, hell, Les, he said, they work harder for you for nothing than they work for us for money. Yeah. But it was that way, Dave. I mean, there was never a open competition like we're going out there and have a match you guys can't follow. But it was a lot of, and everybody, it was a lot of energy in the building. I mean, it was special. Yeah. It wasn't because I made it special or because anybody in particular made it special. It just, that's the way it came about, Yeah. And everybody put on their work. And, well, I use Benoit. I mentioned Benoit and Regal. I use their match from 2000 as a teaching tool. Yeah. It's a classic.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a friggin' classic.
Yeah.
And so there's always something special. And 2000, we had hoped to have Flair and Austin both here, but we didn't. But Flair, Rick was here, and Steve couldn't make it. But this was when Mark Curtis, Brian Hildebrand, was suffering from stomach cancer.
Yeah, right.
And I remember his wife calling me at the gym and saying, he was being fed through a port.
Yeah.
And he was losing weight, and she called. She said, I'm taking him to the hospital. He wanted me to call you and let you know if you called that everything was okay. And I could hear Brian in the background yelling, Tell him I'll be at the show. Tell him I'm going to be at the show. This was the show in '99.
Yeah.
The second one.
Yeah.
And so the idea was for the main event in that one was Benoit and Malenko against Conan and Ray Mysterio.
Uh-huh.
And so the idea was to have Mark referee the main event. And so anyway, I said, okay, just tell him to take care of himself. So he gets there, and I told him, I said, okay, I was teasing Terry Taylor and Dr. Tom worked. I called it the old timers match. Of course, they weren't that old at the time, but I said you referee Terry and Tommy's match because it won't be as intense or it won't move as fast, and so he said, well, okay, if that's what you want. So anyway, I was doing the ring announcing myself that year, and so I go out to introduce the main event, and here comes Mark out of the dressing room, and he probably at the time wasn't 130 pounds.
Yeah,
and but what a heart this guy! I mean, pound for pound, the toughest SOB. I loved him to death. I mean, he fought through this like a champ. Anyway. So he gets in the ring. I said, I didn't think you were going to do this. He said, well, I'm out here. And I said, well, that I can tell. I said, you all right? He said, yeah. He said, but are you going to stay out here by the ring for to watch the match? I said, yeah. He said, well, if I can't make it, you can carry my ass back to the back. And, so there was always something special about it. But that Benoit Regal match in 2000 at the Schmidt Fieldhouse at Xavier University, my God. Yeah, that was just blow away great. They had 2,000 people on their feet before that thing was over. So yeah, those shows were special, and I'm proud of them. But there were so many people. Well, the guys first of all, the guys coming in here on their day off and working their butts off, and giving their time, but I had a committee here that helped with the setting up transportation, catering, et cetera, and we started having meetings once a week, 7 months out, getting ready for this thing. So, but yeah, those were great. I'm proud of them and proud of everybody who got involved in it.
Yeah. Well, and you're still at it, right? I mean, you're doing lots of seminars and stuff now. Tell us about
trying to. The more the merrier. I tell you what, my creditors wish I were doing more. Quite frank.
Well, tell us about what if we have a potential promoter out there or a potential group out there, it's looking to bring Les Thatcher in for a seminar. Tell us about it. Sell them on it right now if they're listening.
Well, they can reach me, Les at EPWT.com or Les Thatcher at Zoomtown.com. I'll be more than happy to send them the information. I prefer doing weekends, like a Saturday, Sunday, Dave, simply because you get more time you have with the kids, the better.
Sure.
It is, the more comfortable they are, and the more you can teach them. I feel that if you give me 2 days and the kids will pay attention, I'll send them away with something that will improve their in-ring talent.
Yeah.
But I cover everything. I cover tag team, singles, psychology, conditioning, et cetera, just virtually everything to do with the business. And normally we start the promoters will fly me in on Friday. Sometimes we do a Q&A on Friday night, and then we start training like around 9 or 10 Saturday morning, break for an hour for lunch, train then till, if they have a show on Saturday evening, I'll help out. I'll sit in and do color, help in the dressing room, whatever. And we'll train all day, do the same schedule on Sunday, and then we'll train till 5 or 6 o'clock Sunday evening, then send me home on Monday.
Yeah.
You can go EPWT, Elite Pro Wrestling Training, is a website that started. Harley Race and Ricky Steamboat and I started doing what we called super camps back in 2004. Yeah. And we actually have, it's out of print now, but we did a training manual called the Professional Wrestlers Workout and Instructional Guide that was put out by Sports Publishing LLC, and they went out of business. But you can still, they tell me they're out there on Amazon for as much as $300 or $400. Wow. I wish I had a couple of cases of them. I'd love to sell some.
Yeah, really.
But Harley and Ricky and I did that particular training manual, and then we did these camps together. But EPWT, Elite Pro Wrestling Training, is a website, and you can go on there, and there are testimonials of promoters and wrestlers that I've worked with, and So I feel very confident that, I give something back, and, I'd love to be doing one or two of these every month if I could.
Yeah.
And I've been, I was under contract at WWE for, actually both companies, WCW and WWE. I did the performance. I was a guest coach at the Performance Center last year, and I think I'm going back again after the first of the year to do another week down there. So, and if you've seen Nigel McGuinness wrestle, or Shark Boy, or B.J. Whitmer,
all those
guys, Carl Anderson, or
straight out of Heartland, aren't they?
yeah, that's where they started.
That's right. Yeah,
exactly.
It's it's like any business out there, right? Any profession. You're never stop learning, and you always have to go back and get refresher classes and some further training. So really, no matter where you're at, there's always more to learn. So I'd highly suggest these guys bring you in to do these seminars. And as we've talked about here for almost an hour and a half, there's no aspect of the business that you've not been there and done that. So you can help in so many ways.
Sir. Yes, sir. The only thing I've haven't done in 58 and a half years, Dave, is get rich.
Yeah, well.
I've missed the boat there.
Yeah,
but I feel blessed. I've lived enough life, I guess, for three people, and I feel that I've contributed a lot to the business in different capacities, and I hope to continue to do some till the good Lord decides it's time to go home.
That's right. Well, tell everybody. We talked about your seminar. You're also on social media, right? You have a Twitter and things. How can they follow you to keep up with you?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter and on Facebook, and I work with Rudy Gonzalez, who was the head trainer for Shawn Michaels, and I do at least one camp a year at the Monster Factory, and the One Fall Power Factory, which is Ray Lloyd Glacier and QT Marshall, which is a ROH subsidiary in Atlanta.
Yep.
I work with them, and but I'm available. Please feel free to get in touch with me. I'll be more than happy to send you out the information. And like I say, you can see testimonials from various guys, in terms of that, some of the guys now in 205, Tony Nese, Drew Gulak are both guys that I've worked with, Cedric Alexander. It's just, so a lot of a lot of these guys I didn't start, but I've had some influence on their training and on their talent, and I'm proud to watch them all. They're all good kids.
Yeah. So I highly advise everybody to go out there, follow you on Twitter, connect with you on Facebook, and again, if you've got a promotion out there and you want to enhance your product, enhance your talent, then reach out to Les and work with him and set something up, bring him in. He can only bring more to your product. So. Les, we thank you.
And my creditors would appreciate it.
Absolutely, let's. Les says he's not gotten rich yet, so let's all work together. Let's try to make Les rich.
Send me to my grave with some wealth.
Yeah, that's right. And if you're not in the business, whatever, say Les, like we said earlier, Les has a Pro Wrestling Tee store, so go on and buy a shirt or a dozen or so, and help him out there.
Yeah.
Any way you can.
There you go.
Let's help Les get rich. So, well, Les, we appreciate you coming on and talking with us for so long and talking about everything you've done in your career. It was truly an
Dave.
honor.
I appreciate you having me on, and I'd say let's do it again, but I don't know what we could cover.
Well, I'm sure we can figure something out sometime. So, but again, like I said, follow Les out there on social media. Keep up and follow what he's doing, and go check out his website and what he's doing, those testimonials and his seminars. And Les, thank you for coming on, and we'll catch up and we'll talk to you again in the future. So,
all right, great, Dave, and thank you so much. I enjoyed it.